what a day. Wait, are you recording? Okay. Hi, Sterling Archer, the world's greatest spy. God, you've got so much to catch up on. So we're gonna have to montage the shit out of this thing. Here we go. Watch everything. Woohoo!
So,
Shut up, here it comes. Try to keep up. I've been sous chef, bartender, drug dealer, Captain Bob, hitman, astronaut, pirate king, a private investigator, the world's greatest secret agent. Punch, bang, boom. I've been up against terrorists, communists, cannibals, clowns, aliens, Dudley douchebags, tranny bikers, the world's slowest elevator, cyborgs. I forgot the space pirates. Anywho, I've had sex with Veronica, Jeanette, Cheryl, Janelle, Katya, La Madrina. I don't remember this. Get me drunk enough and I might have sex with...
hey!
Super. But long story short, I've been shot, stabbed, set on fire, poisoned, shot, sexually assaulted, partially chewed, shot, and declared legally dead. Twice on the same day. This is gonna be, wait for it, epic! Ba 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 boom. Click. Ba 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 boom. Boom. Ba 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 boom. 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 Did I just blow your mind? Oh! Booyakasha! I swear to God, I can watch this like a million times. Archer.
Now streaming. FX on Hulu.
Really? That actually sounds pretty cool.
Science fiction and Comic-Con go together. When we first landed on the moon, it showed us that anything is possible. And if the Soviets landed on the moon first, I would imagine things would be very different. When Comic-Con started in 1970, it was just after the moon landing, and it was this gathering which had comic books, costuming, science fiction.
It's such an honor to be a part of this Comic-Con world. It doesn't get bigger when it comes to sci-fi, TV shows, and comics.
Comic-Con is all about uncovering the unknown, and For All Mankind fits perfectly into that because it is uncovering territory that we haven't seen before.
The shock across the nation at this event is indescribable. A Soviet cosmonaut has become the first to set foot on the moon.
The premise of For All Mankind is the Soviet Union beats the United States in landing the first man on the moon in 1969. And as a result, all of history changes.
The development of technology goes quicker, the social change is more rapid. Instead of seeing the space race decline, it is enhanced and accelerated.
Ignition sequence has started.
It is interesting to think about if the Soviets beat us to the moon, what the impact of this alternate history would be. If being on the moon, going to Mars was a part of our everyday life, then I think we'd look for something else in our movies and comic books.
The Soviets landing on the moon first might have had a huge impact on Comic-Con. Maybe we push the envelope a little bit more with science fiction.
Had the Soviets landed on the moon in reality first, maybe Comic-Con would have been even larger. Maybe we would be further along in technology. We would all be super nerds, and it would be incredible.
Comic books have always reflected culture. Spider-Man and Hulk stem from fears about radiation. The X-Men reflecting the civil rights movement. So I think the Cold War element of space makes the moon really fertile ground for comic books in particular.
I think it would have had lots of changes in Comic-Con and pop culture because there would be more science fiction and space-oriented comics and probably more film and television as well.
Would it have affected the original Battlestar? Probably, yes. Things might have been a little darker, and there would be this race. There would be this competition.
Maybe E.T. would have got the word that the Russians are more interested in space than anywhere else in the world, and that's where they would have gone to visit. Yeah, who knows?
Star Trek would have changed, and the original show would have definitely had a Cold War vibe to it. Klingons would be stand-ins for the Soviets.
Jamestown base has landed on the edge of Shackleton Crater. How about that? We're on the moon to stay.
For All Mankind asks some very interesting questions, because if the Soviets landed on the moon first, the world is in a very different place.
The construct of having the Soviets landing first You have to see For All Mankind. That's where you get the full impact.
Adversity is not always bad. Sometimes losing is good. And when we try harder, we do better.
Great storytelling has the ability to pull people in and ask the question of what if.
For All Mankind is just an exquisitely, brilliantly executed show that belongs in this world that Comic-Con loves.
Remember, we chose to go to the moon, not because it was easy, but because it was hard. New mutants are dangerous. You're not going anywhere. This place takes your greatest fear and makes you live through it. Roberto? Sam? Liliana? Danny? Rain? We can get out of this together.
This place is designed to keep us inside.
He's right, it's magic. So am I.
That was so hot.
The New Mutants, rated PG-13. And on July 23rd, don't miss the New Mutants panel at Comic-Con at Home.
Seriously, fans always ask, does the cast have a favorite episode, a favorite cutaway, a favorite moment? What comes to mind over 350 episodes?
You know, for me, it's probably our Clue episode. And then there were fewer. I'm partial to that one.
How about you, Alex?
I have moments that I love, and I've mentioned most of them, and there seems to be a theme. Like I was laughing because this act that we just read, Seth had a moment that it's something that we've done before, and it always makes me laugh. Him getting the phone and going, "Who is this?" Or one time when they're fighting on a boat, and Joe throws Peter something. He's like, "Don't throw things at me, Joe." Like, I just love those ridiculous moments that are just pure character. And for Lois, my favorite line of all time is, "Who wants chowder?"
Hi, this is Mayor Kevin Faulkner. And July is hands down the best month to be in San Diego. And that's in large part because of Comic-Con International. Comic-Con weekend is an annual tradition that our entire city looks forward to every single year. And this year, of course, will be a little different. Instead of getting together in person, we'll be celebrating Comic-Con virtually this week. The real-life superheroes who put on Comic-Con have put together a fantastic lineup of action-packed panels that I know you're going to enjoy. And while the format may have changed, the most important aspect of this year's event remains. Comic-Con is for everyone. Comic-Con has always been a welcoming place for people from all walks of life to share their passion for the arts. And San Diego has the same philosophy. Our city's greatest strength is our diversity. And that's why it's so fitting that Comic-Con has called San Diego home for the past 50 years. So speaking on behalf of all San Diegans, we're going to miss seeing you and all the creative costumes that bring smiles to so many faces. But San Diego looks forward to having Comic-Con back, along with all of you, in person next year. So to all the Star Lords, Wonder Women, and Baby Yodas out there, welcome to Comic-Con 2020, the at-home version. Have a great time, and we'll see you next year.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us. We are Geek Ed, a coalition of educators who investigate and interrogate the intersection between higher education and popular culture. My name is Alfred Day. I am the Associate Dean of Students and Director of the Center for Support and Intervention at the University of California, Berkeley. I use he, him, and his pronouns, and I would like to read something, and then I'll have my colleagues introduce themselves. A couple saves their son from the destruction of their advanced civilization with a message of hope. That child goes on to become a symbol of hope and inspiration in 1938, establishing a new idea, the superhero. This story applies to both Superman, largely acknowledged to be the inspiration for the modern era of the superhero, and to Watchman's hooded justice in HBO's Watchmen, based on the comic book Watchmen by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. This very intentional allusion to Superman gives us a narrative that significantly complicates the trope of the masked Avenger. In fiction, a symbol of inspiration, but in real life, a symbol of a much more troubling nature. David, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, David Surratt. I use he, him pronouns. I'm Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students at the University of Oklahoma and native of Oklahoma as well.
And Kalinda.
Hello, Kalinda Eaton, she, her, hers pronouns. I am a professor of African and African American Studies at the University of Oklahoma.
Haley.
Hi, I'm Haley Lopez, she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm a case manager for Student Affairs at the Center for Intervention and Support at UC Berkeley.
And Rob.
Hi, I'm Robert Hypes. I am a Community Impact Manager from United Way Merced County, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
Thank you all for joining us. So Watchmen came out earlier this year and was quite popular, and a lot of people saw it. And I think I am surprised upon my rewatch based on this panel, how more and more prescient and relevant to today's, and particularly this weekend, the weekend we're recording this, which is the weekend that President Trump had a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, how much more relevant every day HBO's Watchmen has become. In thinking about Watchmen, and particularly thinking about the ideas behind masks and the idea that masks make one cruel, What are folks thinking about? How is this impacting them, particularly in light of this weekend's events? Does anybody have initial thoughts?
Well, I think, if I can jump in, that I immediately think about this kind of dual purpose, right, of the mask, especially as it relates to race relations in the United States. And so we have, for example, if we're thinking about along this kind of black-white binary, right, we have African Americans who often wear masks for protection, right, to conceal hurt, to conceal trauma, to protect themselves from, more hurt and trauma, right? And then you have masks being worn by those who we would probably identify as villains, or those who are kind of inflicting that trauma. And so as it relates to kind of what's happening this weekend, or what was happening this weekend, we have a lot of wounds, of course, in this country that have not been healed, fully healed. And a lot of people, I think, have been kind of hiding behind various different masks, whether they be masks of ignorance, right, or masks of protection. And those are, being just kind of taken off. And I think we see a lot of that in the protests that are out in the streets, but also just in the ways in which people are really interrogating, the administration right now.
That is very interesting. Introducing the idea of masks being complicated by both, worn by both heroes and villains. It's something I hadn't really considered in that thought process.
Yeah, I'd say one thing in addition to that too, and I remember when the TV series came out, and you saw some of the social media chatter from folks who literally said, I was that day old when I heard about the race massacre, and not realizing it, right? So it was, so I think that, the rally happening in Tulsa this weekend was interesting because it created more dialogue and conversation for folks who've never been exposed to either Juneteenth or the significance of Juneteenth and the history of race relations in Oklahoma specifically. And when the series came out, I remember just texting a few friends and scholars too, and just saying, this is a very interesting time right now, because when you start thinking about the convergence of pop culture and this history of our country, especially history of ill, I found it to be a tremendously important moment in our time. And so I'm glad we're having this conversation as well too, because especially with the history of the Watchman, basically taking historical events and then pivoting them for the sake of both connection to our own history, but also connection to some real opportunities and lessons learned about our understanding of heroes and villains. I thought that was really powerful right now too.
Yeah, I found it incredibly powerful. And like I said, I rewatched for the basis of this panel. And one of the things that I noted on a rewatch was how much, as you note, David, the intersection between real world and the sort of fantasy world of Watchmen are very intricately connected and somewhat complexly composed against each other. For example, Watchmen starts with a young man watching a fictional film about a real life individual, Bass Reeves,
Right.
Who was the inspiration for a fictional character, the Lone Ranger, whose race was changed for obviously, who was one of the inspirations for the entire superhero genre, of which Watchmen, when it came out in 1985, was a commentary and reaction to. So, and all of that is very intentional, right? And so, and for me, thinking of myself as the only Black nerd in Merced, California in 1985, picking up Watchmen off of the racks at the 7-Eleven, and it really being central to my first encountering narratives that were complex. It wasn't the same old Batman story where Batman punches the Joker in the face and drives away in his rocket car, right? It was much more complex, and I remember picking Watchmen up off of the stand, and then having to go to the library to kind of understand some of the context of what was going on, and specifically sort of really understanding the politics that Watchmen was playing with. And this was in the graphic novel at the time. I'll say it was in the comic books because I was buying them off the stands monthly. And then when you come to this year's or this era's HBO's Watchmen, much similar as you talk about, David, people having the reaction. particularly around knowing the historical events around the Tulsa race massacre and things of that sort. For other folks, like, how did you receive Watchmen when you found it? Was some of it surprising? What about that intersection between real life and fantasy that it plays with?
Yeah, for me, a sentiment that's already been shared, but think about how when I was watching Watchmen, and again, I've also rewatched it for this panel as well, it parallels our time. So even though Watchmen, the universe of Watchmen occurs in this alternate reality where the Cold War, where we had kind of extended the Cold War, the United States had won Vietnam. There's this kind of parallelism, and yet here we are at the same place. But that's where I remember thinking about, it's telling a story, but in this story, here are these just kickers of truths about our modern society, and some of that are the wounds that we haven't healed. And I just remember, like, almost watching the series for me was a little bit of unmasking of naming the things that are happening in the United States currently that we've, as a society have layered over. The series for me came in and took that away, and really played with the concept of the vigilante and of the villain in the Watchmen universe as a means to talk about very serious racial hurt in the United States. And in the past month, the relevance of even of the concept of the masks we wear are cruel, or the masks we wear are ways for us to deal with our trauma and process that trauma as we move in the world, has become way, way relevant. So yeah, I think sometimes fiction tells us a truth and mirrors back to ourselves. Watchmen is doing that. Watchmen did that. And it's important to have that dialogue about how that impacts our current reality in the United States.
Yeah, no, it's actually, to me, really interesting these last few months. And I think I keep coming back to this concept of society as a whole is like unmasking itself and realizing certain aspects of our country, our culture that we were not even aware of. And I think, Al, I think you and I both talked about how Watchmen opened up with the Tulsa massacre, and just like that's something that has, in my kind of viewing of TV movies, like I've never seen that before, and the way that it was done, like you're glued to the screen. And then like you, like I was reading all these reviews as well as all these comments of people like, I had no idea that this ever occurred. I have a master's degree. I have, at no point in my schooling have I ever actually studied that. And this seemed, and even the concept of Juneteenth, so many people are like, wait a second, this happened. This is a thing. This isn't just for this year. And seeing all of the people that have responded to that way, just, all these realizations that are hitting society is kind of an interesting time, coupled with how interesting our political environment is and how that is becoming it just seems like everything is becoming unmasked to me. Like it's, all these people are starting to realize certain aspects of their history that they never even thought of before. This is coming from the guy that grew up in, country of Arkansas. So it's like, wait a second, just reading my Facebook comments of people that I used to go to middle school and high school with, I'm like, okay, well, all right.
That's interesting, because I spent a week in Arkansas for 2 nights. It was a whole thing. I had to pick up my sister. There was a U-Haul involved. We won't get into it. We talked a little bit about the mixing of fantasy and reality, right? And how Bass Reeves, who was an actual real life person, inspired the Lone Ranger, a fictional person, who then inspired a real life retelling of a fictional character's journey. And it's sort of this idea that just sort of feeds, it's an iterative idea that feeds on itself. When we talk about sort of mask in addition to having a history in terms of superhero narratives, they have a history in drama and in thought. Rob, can you talk a little bit about what masks mean theatrically?
Well, it's just it's a really long history, kind of like spanning all the way to the ancient Greek theater. And a lot of times what they utilized the mask for was stock characters and to influence stereotypes or to show emotions, especially with like their Greek chorus that they were utilizing. So, you know, you wore the mask and the audience knew instinctively who that character was, who that character was representing. It also, you know, we would utilize masks because at the time, throughout the history of theater, people didn't really have a good opinion about it. So you were masking performers because those performers were not well thought of in society. And it's kind of this concept that has stretched throughout the years, is that, you know, you wear the mask to showcase this particular aspect of the character that you're trying to bring across. You wear the mask to protect your identity in front of the audience that you're performing with. It's kind of stretched all the way into modern movie making. And then also, like, even in society, when people used to wear masks to go to the theater, when you were kind of higher up in society, you would put a mask on to be able to attend live theater, so no one there kind of knew who you were and what family you belonged to, so you could go see a show. So we've been utilizing masks just for centuries, just both to hide our true identities and also to allow the audience to kind of see, to know automatically who that character was and what that character represented.
Which I find very fascinating, because in this is something I've said a lot. I'm a huge comic book fan. I love Batman more than I love certain members of my own family. And Batman is someone who puts on a mask to seek out justice. But I also know that in the real world that I live in, someone who puts on a mask to seek out justice is more likely to be a member of the Ku Klux Klan. So when we think of sort of the theatrical history of masks and we think of the real world history of masks, masks in the real world are often used, as you mentioned, to sort of hide someone from something they're ashamed about, or to hide something from someone's identity from a deed that they are ashamed to be engaged in. Does anybody have any ideas how that's manifesting itself sort of from a modern perspective? What masks are people putting on, whether metaphorically or literally, today? And in addition to the COVID mask that many of us are wearing in public.
Well, I think it's, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I really appreciate your comments. And I couldn't get this out of my head with what Kalinda and Haley also mentioned, though, too. I mean, I think of Apollo and Stormbar. You know, we wear the mask that grins and lies, that hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. It's something that comes to me all the time, because, yes, we talk about the use of masks in order to shield shame, but then also I think there's two other folds of it. There's one probably around the idea of even modesty in some form or fashion, of trying to maintain a sense of humility, but there's also a self-preservation part, or even managing certain types of trauma or navigating life every day, in which masks are worn. And so, and to Robert's point too, you reminded me of that around the idea of even life stations, right? So if, you know, historically masks were seen as a way to hopefully strip down either class differences or whatnot, to be able to attend certain social functions as well, and sort of create this sort of I guess level field. But then unintentionally it upholds these hierarchies and the supremacy, either economic or social supremacy that happens, because without that mask, you know, it's what's real, what's happening in your environment. So for me, you know, one of the things that I just think about is you know, Hooded Justice as a character himself in the TV series and historically in the graphic novels. I found it very intriguing in that he's obviously wearing that mask because they know he knew the public wasn't ready for a black superhero. He just knew it. He knew he'd be attacked and hunted down. His family would be in danger. But then also the fact that he's wearing that hood, and also that the noose around his neck, it's some way of him trying to even mask or even get through his trauma by almost echoing it for anyone that he encounters, to say, this is what you caused. And so it's really, that's one part of it that really stood out to me.
I agree. And I think also, back to this question of kind of in the modern day, also thinking about, you know, we wear the mask that grins and lies, right? That people often wear masks in order to play a game. Right, they're playing the game, so to speak, right? And so I'm thinking about, even if you think, I know the Klan was mentioned earlier, and it's kind of this history of the Klan, and how, you know, once it manifests into something more menacing than I guess what it started out being, the masks were worn to startle and kind of terrorize, right, African Americans, based on this belief that African Americans were afraid of ghosts. Right, and that you know, this was going to be some way to kind of, you know, unnerve them, and so this kind of idea that, you know, they were playing, that the people in wearing the hoods were going to kind of play on the fears, right, of these African Americans, but many African Americans knew who were, you know, the people who knew who they were, right, the people who were actually under the hoods, and so they would also kind of like play back, right? I mean, this is of course when murder was not involved, right? But, you know, kind of play back, right? And just kind of, you know, pretend, right? That, you know, they were kind of very terrified or terrorized or what have you, but at the same time kind of playing this game to say, okay, you know, we see what you're doing to us, but we also, you know, have a plan B, right? You know, and so then it, you know, it kind of manifests in ways that are a lot more menacing and terrorizing, and, you know, people are kind of, you know, running through towns and what have you, and killing others. But in the kind of very beginning, it was just like, oh, you think that you're going to, you know, cause us to submit. We'll pretend like we are, but we really aren't. So there's a lot of pretending with mask wearing as well, that I think that's important throughout history, but also I think a lot of what we do in the day-to-day, right, even on our jobs sometimes, you know, there's some masks that are being worn that people don't always reveal.
It's an interesting point when you talk about sort of the play back and forth of you know, between the folks who knew that there was a Klan, the Klan pretending that they didn't know, and then the oppressed folks being like, oh, let me pretend that I'm scared. This sort of going back to Rob's point, this sort of murderous theater sort of going back and forth amongst.
Well, that's like Don Johnson's character. I don't remember names. I'm a horrible. I don't remember names at all, but
I think it was Judd. I think it was
Judd. Oh, yep, Judd. This idea of like the political mask, this mask that you wear in society, this mask that you wear when you're around town talking to the people, and then when that mask comes off, kind of the reveals that are there when, you know, you're actually real. I've seen that happen. Like I've been watching a lot of just local city council meetings, supervisor meetings, and it's really interesting, some of these protests, because a lot of these protests that you have really eloquent members that are coming to these meetings now and are in essence like unmasking these political players, these people in positions of power, that and saying, you know, why aren't you looking after yourselves? Here are the things that you've been getting away with in society, and you're supposed to be the representatives of our society. You're supposed to be the people that we look up to, the people that we trust. And I find that that's happening politically all across the country, where people are being, you know, political figures are being unmasked, and you're kind of seeing what lies beneath, almost kind of like it just reminded me of just seeing Judd and, you know, kind of what you saw at the very beginning, and actually going, hey, you know, for me personally, it's like, I love Don Johnson. I'm like, oh, hey, you're so nice. Okay. And then all of a sudden the reveal happens and you go, oh my God, okay. I did not anticipate that at all. And I think that's what you see a lot in today's society too.
And it replicates an experience I've had many times.
Glenda, what did you say? I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I was saying, I don't know, he kept singing Oklahoma. He was singing a little too hard for me in the beginning. So.
No, I was like, I'm suspicious of you. First episode, sorry, this is a little bit off topic, but first episode where he gets up from the table and he does drugs in the kitchen. And I was like, the first indication that you're not what you've seen. It was just very interesting the way anyway. I was also thinking about what Rob's statement about masks historically also telling the audience who the character is, right? And how the audience can kind of depend on, all right, you've put on this mask now, so your motivations are these, and this is who you are. And kind of like the subversion of that, that Watchman, I'm particularly referring to the HBO series right now, but shows in that actually you can't, like the mask that maybe someone wears shows their true intentions, and then the ones that they're wearing to usual normal polite society are not actually the ones, that's not actually who they are, and that they're mitigating and managing their character through this mask. And I was also thinking about electronic masks in some way too. I've been seeing that a lot lately as well. Students, for example, using different social medias, and I'm thinking about particularly the Finstagrams and other methods of selecting who gets to see what you post, then what you post to the social media account that you have that is supposed to be public, and seeing the bias, particularly bias recently, has been happening a lot on these private platforms where someone is kind of saying perhaps what they're really thinking, and then someone there posting that to their real platform, and noting like, well, you know, you've said this word here or displayed these sentiments over here, I want you held accountable for that. And like a shock when the person is asked to be held accountable for those things. And I don't know if you all have any thoughts about that, but that's been particularly hard as an educator to dive in with folks about talking about their own identity development, the way that they portray themselves or perceive themselves to be, and then the hurt or harm that they cause because they are, or in some ways, wearing a mask to the general facing public, and have these really like insidious undertones of their actual behavior or beliefs.
No, that's really real. I'll just say quickly, so my office, we work in coordination with our Division for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and we are responding to bias incidents all the time. And I think particularly as the campaign's going to heat up, and also in the last 3 weeks with the amount of activism that we see in the country, across the world in some ways too, we've been seeing more reports where people have been, I guess in some ways, shedding certain types of masks themselves. They are saying, you know what, I know I've said privately that I'm against certain types of white supremacist acts or racist acts, but I haven't really spoken out on it. And I feel like there were some people who were trying to find some empowerment by contacting our office and basically revealing some of the social media stuff or the things and actions and behaviors that were definitely biased in nature, and reporting to our office. And so the interesting thing is the amount of things that we've gotten now has actually caused more labor on Black and brown folks like myself or my colleague who's the Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, to try to respond to these things. And it's very, very interesting because the amount of labor that we're having to put in to reach out and contact students who we know are engaging in certain types of choices that are antithetical to our core values as an institution, and yet we're caught in the crux because there's also First Amendment protections that allow even hate speech to be able to exist, right, in certain ways. But that same protection allows me to speak out on social media myself and call out things, or my colleagues do the same thing. So that's the one thing that kind of comes out to me. But the one other thing that I think about too, from the connection to even the TV series, I think about the character Looking Glass. So I think about what he sees himself as. He's exercising his own trauma because of feeling he got deceived. And so he's so focused and fixated as a law enforcement officer to not just cover his identity, but to hopefully reveal ugliness in other people in his own way of managing his own trauma. But in some ways, I think it's our kind of job of trying to help process this with our students. And so when I'm having a conversation with a student who uses the N-word in social media and gets called out, or does misogynist things and statements like that, and when I read it back to them, and I literally mirror it for them and say it, and they realize how outlandish it sounds hearing my voice, and realizing it doesn't connect to their core values or what they hope their core values are intended to be. That's the hard part of our job as educators, is trying to control for my own values and my own bias in those situations. Because sometimes, frankly, I want to shake some folks, really I do. But we're trying to get them right. We're trying to get them to have alignment between what they hope their core values are going to be and where their actions are. And so that's the biggest part that it reminds me of in your question too.
I just have a question with that, I guess, for whomever, in terms of just this unmasking, right, that people are doing, that their peers are doing. We see this with entertainers as well as students on campus, where they will, post, these particular conversations or things that were private, right? And so then they're unmasking these others. And kind of who is this? Do you also see this as a form of vigilantism, as I was trying to say? Like, are these vigilantes? Oh, I'm going to expose this one, I'm going to expose that one. I mean, kind of who has the power to unmask and who doesn't? Because I'm thinking about Watchman, right? And Judd tells, it might have been Looking Glass, I don't remember. I'm sure someone on the panel will correct me. But he says, when he has his mask up, he says, pull your face down, right? When, he's like, he's about to go out back into public. It's like, I can tell you, when to put your mask on and when to take it off, right? I have this hour, right? And I'm just wondering how that fits in with kind of the ways in which these other students are saying, are kind of, telling their peers, like, okay, I can unmask you, right? Or I can, kind of allow you rather to be masked, right? By not, calling you out. So I'm just wondering what you all think, or if that makes any sense.
Oh my gosh.
That makes perfect sense to me, because that's, well, even in context, like I remember even maybe a year ago where you had some people that were just saying ridiculous things or stupid things, or in one certain case, someone posting something as gospel from the Babylon Bee and having to be like, that's a satire website, I hope you know that. And what's interesting now is you're seeing more and more people that are calling people out on social media saying that's wrong. That's what you're saying right now. That is wrong. That's not right. That's not moral. And it's kind of an interesting, because to me, like always in the past, like the internet was always like this lawless Wild West that encouraged like the worst dregs of humanity to come out and say whatever they wanted to because they finally could. Usually it was regulated to, pop culture like Watchmen or Star Wars or Game of Thrones. It was regulated to that. But now you see like people that are just coming out saying like the worst things that you can, and even the most uneducated, but then being called out legitimately by people that they know that you saw maybe a year ago, like they were all hanging out together, and now you have like people that are calling out. And I think it is a form of like vigilante. I won't be able to say that word, but you know what I mean.
I think it's a very interesting dilemma, right? Because I've always, because I'm a comic book fan, I've always differentiated between vigilantism and sort of the superhero trope, and I don't think the two are equal. I think the distinction that we may be seeing is that the people who are calling folks out are not wearing a mask and are often standing behind what they're saying. And I think that's a distinct difference between sort of putting a mask on and saying, hey, this person did this, but don't ask me about it, I don't want to be involved. And saying, no, I witnessed this person say this thing or do this thing, and I want you to know, and I'm going to hold you to account, to hold them to account, right? It is. I think there's a subtle difference between sort of the sort of anonymous seeking vengeance and opening yourself and saying, no, I will stand up and I will be identified, and you will be able to put a name to my statement, and if you want to talk about it, let's talk about it. I think that's a really interesting distinction.
Yeah, I got excited when Kalinda mentioned the idea of vigilantism in sort of this electronic world too, because I was like, I didn't ever think about why it was a challenge for me, because there are moments where there's social justice kind of vigilantism that shows up. And because that person is not responsible for the outcome or the follow-up or the fallout, they do kind of take on this personal kind of pride and heroism of like, stamping out, an issue or whatever, but then not being responsible for the outcomes after that. And that labor falls on something else, other structures. And so that's the one thing that really I find very, very right and very intriguing and very challenging for me, because there's times where I do feel like the students are right to call each other out for sure. But the students who are oftentimes most, prepared to really understand what the impacts are the ones that we engage in more conversation. And I talk to them about what the follow-up is and what's going on. that can be really, really challenging trying to go through the whole process.
I also, I think about, I do see it as that's such a great point. There is this tinge of vigilantism. So some of I think where I'm sitting, I get reports from campus, from other students, from faculty, but the ones that we're getting from students are like coordinated, right? Like I saw something on Instagram, I saw something on Snapchat, what have you, and I had a problem with it. And not only did I have a problem with it, I have 15 other people who are about to have a problem with it too and submit it. And so like there's this kind of like sense of, and now institution, do something. It's actually on you, institution, to do something. I want punishment. And so many of my conversations with folks are, what is punishment, right? Like, is it punishment? Like where are we with your understanding of maybe someone like of that accountability piece and of that education piece? And so it's like a good thing, and at the same time it's a difficult, complex thing. What happens when we do have someone reporting to the institutional structure that something has happened that is harmful behavior? And then like the cynic in me, my inner cynic, also thinks about how that some of this has been increasing the last few weeks as everyone's been virtual, and there's more investment in virtual communities, and I think about how sometimes the social media call outs are almost like a mask too. It's very easy for me to sit behind my computer and say, well, but would I do it in person in our in-person communities? And then is that the next step of thinking about how we address, for example, bias? And also my mind goes back to the Crawfords and Senator King, who knew all the right things to say on their platforms that are really public facing, but there's like this insidious back end, right? And I think as a white person, I've been seeing that too, where it's like, you know, there's a post and everyone does that post. And then I question, we're like, well, behind the screen though, is this the mask that you're showing the public, or is this the mask you wear, right? And what does that mean? So sorry, there's a lot of thoughts there, but I love this idea of vigilantism.
I wonder how much of this is youth-led as well, because for me, what I'm seeing is a lot of young people that are leading a lot of calling out other people online, that are leading a lot of these movements. And I wonder, you know, this whole generation of people that have grown up with just being part of the virtual world, and you know, we're all still just kind of learning it, and they've grown up with it, know it better than we'll ever know. So they've kind of grown up with this concept of not necessarily having a mask in the virtual world, where all of us are used to spending years of our lives developing our own kind of private masks to get further along in our job, or to get along with our colleagues, and they're not used to that. What I'm seeing a lot is, you know, people that are, you know, 19 into their middle 20s that are going into these meetings and are calling out these people in higher positions of power, or calling out these people that post hateful things online. It really is kind of an interesting thing to see, because and they're coordinated, and like you were saying, Haley, like it's not just one person that's doing it. It's one person will see something, call it out, and then 25 other people are doing the exact same thing. And so they're like coordinated attacks. And part of me just really feels that it is just kind of like this younger generation that are just leading this, like, you know what, we've had it. We looked up to you people for so long. You're not fixing anything. We're going to now start it ourselves and just get in the back seat. We're leading the way. We're leading the charge now.
And how much of it, quite frankly, is, and I'll just speak for myself because I don't want to speak on behalf of other people, how much of the reaction is, well, I had to learn respectability politics, and I had to learn how to get along, and you all are coming along and you're not playing respectability politics, right? And how much do I have to sort of check myself and be like, oh, because maybe they're a little braver than I was when I was coming up, and I had over concerns about how I was going to be perceived that this generation doesn't.
Well, something that when Rob was talking about, and also you just picked up on, that I was thinking about another way that we haven't talked about masking, and that is as a filter, right? And so they have no filter, right? And so, and we do, right? And those of us who have had to kind of put up this filter in order to, as he was saying, you know, progress in various different, you know, ladders and different levels or what have you, have this filtering sort of mask. I mean, I know we think about it in terms of, you know, public health, right? And, you know, in the global pandemic and COVID, right, the filter. But what about these other sorts of filters that do tie in definitely with, you know, what's known as respectability politics and the fact that they can be damaging in some way, right? I mean, there is an argument to be made about not filtering and, you know, to be cliche, but right, kind of like speaking truth, right? Where it needs to be spoken rather than kind of like, you know, hiding behind what we think is the appropriate way of presenting an issue.
Yeah, it also reminds me of you know, moments where we uphold and really value authenticity in leadership, or showing up in spaces in authentic ways, where there's consistency with our values and the way we show up as leaders or as community members. And so that reminds me of that too. And what I also find intriguing is how younger folks, especially young activists, are looking at one strategy in social movement building where they are literally telling us, you said this, but this is not consistent with what you said. Now do what you said you were going to do, right? And so that's the hard part, is when we're oftentimes probably even caught in situations where we're the ones who are upholding the consistencies or legitimacy of organizations that we represent. That's the one thing that I give a lot of grace to with our students, especially when they are coming up and saying, you believe in this, but yet you're allowing certain types of things. And so it's a challenging thing, but I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, David, and I think you hit part of the nail on the head, which is not only our generation of students holding each other accountable, but they're holding us to account. And I liked it better when they didn't hold me to account, right? Like, you know, I want to do what I want to do. And this is a generation of students that if you say these are your values, they're going to expect you to live up to those values, and they're going to remind you when you don't. As we wrap up, I just want to make sure that we sort of talk finally about sort of, as we discuss masks and we discuss sort of how we are interfacing with this, if just sort of one final round, what masks are we wearing as a society or in education or in the organizations you're a part of that we need to learn how to take off?
I think for me personally, I think the number one mask to take off is, as I discussed, it gets to be so easy to fall into this is my place within my community and my society, and I've played this role for so long, or I've done this for so long. It's so easy to be like that. I don't think anyone has the luxury of doing that anymore. And what I've learned over the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks is this concept that you have to stand up for what you believe in, and you have to stand up for your community and the people that are around you, even if it's difficult. And I think part of the time, like, since I work in such a small town, it's so easy to get caught up in what I call, you know, the good old boy politics and the good old boy way of doing things, where you have to do things a certain way to kind of move forward or to get the donations that you're looking for. But part of me is, since I work at so strongly with a nonprofit, is, well, what's the point if it's just about moving forward to try and further your company within a certain society or a certain group of people, or to get donations? And if you're not actually fulfilling the mission, which is to help out the residents of your community, what's the point of doing it? And so I think for me, like, I'm trying to move forward and helping and being more active and more engaged for all the residents of my community. I think that's what I have to do moving forward.
For me, throughout, again, the HBO series, I refer to it a lot, but we hear all these different statements about masks. So we hear Lori say, people who wear masks have trauma. We hear Angela's father tell Angela at the picnic that they're at that people who wear masks are scary or have something to hide. Adrian says masks are cruel, right? And at the end, Will Reeves tells Angela after she's like lost her husband and gone through this really emotionally hard journey of learning her family history and who she is, where she comes from, that wounds need air, and that we need to take off those masks and acknowledge the hurt to move forward. And I think in working in higher education, I often think about our wounds need air, not her. Our wounds need air, and naming the things that are hurtful are not in unmasking the policies or the institutional histories that are harming our students and harming our societies and our communities, can only help us move forward. Like, our wounds need air. And I'm seeing that happen more and more. And something that is on my mind as, for example, an example of this is the divestment from police at universities, right? And this thinking of and naming of, we've done harm. There has been harm done by our investiture in police departments and universities, and maybe the policies that we have can be unmasked and changed, and there's going to be pain in that. But we can't continue to put things over it and layer it and carry these wounds behind the mask that we're wearing. So that's kind of where my mind's at right now.
I guess I would just add to that, especially going back to that exchange, all right, that Angela is having with the FBI agent when she does say, you know, people who are wearing masks are driven by trauma or what have you. And Angela's response is, you know, I wear the mask to protect myself, right? And then she cuts in, right, you know, from the pain. And so I guess when I think about that, just being an educator and being in the classroom and mentoring students and advising them, and they're always coming to, you know, my office to talk about their pain, right, and their, you know, issues and their trauma, and how they are being affected negatively, not all the time, but a lot of the times negatively by experiences they're having in the classroom or whatever the case may be. I've always seen it, well, until recently, I should say, I always seen it as my role to just kind of be the quiet listener and give advice, right? But not attempt to try and, you know, kind of unmask, right, myself, right? And I also see it as kind of a way of protection as well. Like, there has to be this divide, right, you know, between, you know, the professor and the student. But I've been noticing just even in my own experience that I've been opening up a lot more, and, you know, explaining to them that, you know, this is also, like, this has many levels. What you're experiencing has many levels, and that there are people around you who are experiencing some of the same, whether they be microaggressions or whatever the case may be, right? Same things and on different levels in different ways. And I found that those conversations are much richer, right? When I'm kind of, you know, taking off the mask, to use the term, right? And just kind of saying, like, you know, this is something that we all are in together, and how can we move forward, right, as a solid body, rather than it being kind of a, you know, us versus them sort of situation.
Yeah, that's a deep question now. I mean, honestly, and I feel like I was short on answers. I think the first thing that really is salient for me is really echoing what others have said, but also a reminder of me in terms of positionality and leadership that I take on in a university setting. One of the things I've tried to do throughout my entire career is figure out how to be forthright and brave, and speaking up not for myself, but also for the people that I represent. And that is not easy. And I know you and I talked about this even before I left UC Berkeley and came back to Oklahoma. I recognize there are certain types of things and experiences in Oklahoma that are very different than other places I've lived, whether it be New York or California. But one of the things that I always remind myself too is that there's a time and place for every opportunity, and if this is the opportunity for me or colleagues of mine to speak up when we were afraid, this is the time. I had a good conversation with some of our activists on campus actually recently, because our Twitter handle had tweeted Black Lives Matter. This is University of Oklahoma tweeting Black Lives Matter, right? So on one fold, we definitely got dinged hard for performative kind of social justice. because if Black Lives really mattered, it would have showed up in our processes, our policies, the way we operate the university, right? So it seemed disingenuous to some people for sure, because they didn't experience it. I was a student here too. I didn't experience that way. Hell, a year ago, I was tokenized as the new man of color that was hired as the new vice president for student affairs. But what I also reflected on is that there's no better time than today to unmask something and to say, at least if it's not the reality, it's an opportunity, and that's our goal. And also it gives other people permission to simply take off something, even if it's a small sliver of themselves, to say, yes, Black Lives Matter to me too. Because you would have never heard that from Lincoln Riley or other, prominent people who've given permission to other folks in Oklahoma, at least I could say, to say that Black Lives Matter too. And so I'd say that's probably one of the masks for me that I try to think about, is there's times when my dad educated me on how to survive. And that meant trying to make sure I be careful who I reveal my full self to, and be watchful of that. And but I also try to channel a little bit of Audre Lorde, right? That we're oftentimes afraid to speak because it won't be welcomed or heard. But if we don't speak it, we are still afraid, and so it's better to speak. So yeah, I think that's the one thing I'm going to think about and process about this conversation.
Well, I thank you for all for showing up and unmasking with your authentic selves here today. We very much appreciate it, and we thank you for your time. Talk to you all later. Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. And also joining me is General Comics legend Rob Liefeld. Rob, how are you doing today? How are you doing during this quarantine, this pandemic, this whole situation?
Hey, great to talk to you. I am doing quite well, very, very well actually. Lot to keep me busy and distracted.
The Deadpool solo video game came out in 2013. Obviously, we've seen Deadpool pop up in other video games throughout the years. We have a new console generation about to come up. Any chance that Deadpool could pop up in another video game sometime in the future?
Wouldn't they, right? Look, man, I'm just going to tell you right now, screw movies. Screw this whole Deadpool movie talk, okay? The anniversary of the game was last week, the 2013 game, okay? And I was thrilled when that came out, and it was next level. It was funny. Deadpool has been a thing for 30 years. So your answer is, of course they should be making more Deadpool video games. Of course they should be making a Deadpool cartoon. Hello, what the hell? There has been no Deadpool entertainment talks that I'm aware of. And as far as the movie, that's above my pay grade, bro. I don't need another Deadpool movie. Don't need it. Got two great ones. They're perfect. Here's what I would say. Hey, Disney. Hi, it's Rob. You paid $70 billion for Fox, okay? You have no way to get all your $3 billion worth of movies into theaters. No Mulan, no Black Widow, no Eternals. Deadpool's kind of popular. Deadpool cartoons, Deadpool video games. Of course they should be making them. Iger, whoever is running the ship over there, What are you doing to get a return on your $70 billion? $70 billion into the Spider-Verse? Disney didn't make that. Sony made that. And I am not politically correct. You know, that's bullshit. Kevin Feige, love you, buddy. You're a genius, but there are other geniuses. You know, the guys who made Into the Spider-Verse, geniuses. Disney had nothing to do with that. Disney had nothing to do with Deadpool, Deadpool 2, Logan, okay? Just because they bought Deadpool, the movie, so Disney buys it from Fox, those producers' deals don't go up in flames. You've got the Producers Guild, you've got the Actors Guild, you've got, you know, my buddy Josh Brolin is contracted for a bunch of appearances as Cable, okay? Well, that lands on your desk. You don't get to take that contract and light it on fire and make it go away. Hopefully the people who are watching this are interested in this, because I'm not scared to talk about it. And here's the reason why. Even back when I met Steven Spielberg and I met Tom Cruise and we started making movie projects together back in the 90s, even when they were uncertain of how to make comic book films and to be honest, were more than a little concerned. You know, even back then, comics brought me to the dance. This is what I do. This is my passion. I make pictures. What I do here is what I've always done. I'm a comic book guy, so I'm not intimidated to speak out about, you know, what do you call it? Multiple different projects or platforms, video games. But do I know that there's an audience for a cartoon, an audience for a video game? All of it. And the movie stuff is complicated. But in the meantime, in a pandemic, what didn't surprise me the other day was that they announced, I think yesterday, or I don't know when this is going to air, but recently they announced that they're making a Bad Batch Star Wars cartoon or a standoff or a spinoff. And I'm like, of course, because I talked to my animation friends. While we are in lockdown, you know what you can do? You can work on your computer. You can make computer graphics. You can make animation. You can work in isolation and continue to make entertainment that people want.
Snake Eyes, Dead Game. Tell us about this book. What was it that drew you to the Snake Eyes character? What can readers expect in this new title?
So it was about this time last year. It was May of 2019, and Chris Ryle, who is the publisher of IDW and a buddy of mine, called me the day another project of mine was hitting called Major X. He called me that. I very distinctly remember. He texted me and said, "Rob, is it time? Should we do G.I. Joe?" Okay, obviously, Hasbro is the parent company. They own, control all of the G.I. Joe property. They always have. Obviously, they've done a great job with it. And so I submitted a storyline that was more Snake Eyes centric, and they gave me the green light. The mail drop came, and I've been pouring all over this book. It turned out great. IDW at Hasbro took great care of me. Snake Eyes specifically, I can tell you, look, the Snake Eyes right here, this deluxe figure that they put out earlier this year, this bad boy, this is the first time I saw a guy hold a katana and a pistol in my life. I had seen great mashups. I remember as a kid, you know, I saw Star Wars and recognized that Han Solo is the cowboy of the piece and that Obi-Wan is the old samurai and Darth Vader was a dark medieval knight in space. I mean, I understood all that language, and I dug it when I was 9 years old, sitting there going, that's Eastern culture. That's like the Kung Fu movies, and that's like the Westerns I watched with my dad. And so I always loved seeing mashups, but I had never seen a character who was ninja-fied, who also holstered a sidearm, and who moved like this. So Snake Eyes was always a giant inspiration, and you might say that the next time you saw a guy with a pistol and a katana, he might have looked like this. And so you don't get to Deadpool without Snake Eyes. I can confirm that, and so it's exciting to do Snake Eyes and kind of honor my childhood.
Awesome. Yeah, I was just going to ask you what comes first, Snake Eyes or Deadpool? It seems like Snake Eyes.
Oh yeah. Oh no. Yeah, no. The Snake Eyes directly informed everything I did with Deadpool, other than he's mute. But right here is Roadblock, and you kind of don't get to Cable without Roadblock. G.I. Joe really informed my corner of the X-Men universe, because I love weapons, I love gear. That all came from G.I. Joe. And I know people have tried to put the pouches on me, like I'm the pouch king. And I always go, wait, did you really never see a soldier in the military before? And have you ever seen a SWAT officer? Like, those guys are covered in pouches, right? But I will gladly be the champion of pouches. That's a moniker I'll wear. But G.I. Joe 100% informed everything that I eventually went on to do with X-Force, with Cable, with Deadpool.
Can you talk a little bit about the villain? Who is Snake Eyes going up against in Dead Game?
Our bad guy, Kurgan, is got his Sword of the Dead Sword. And we haven't really told you what that does yet, but you understand that it's a very powerful weapon, and that you have to sacrifice a certain amount of energy to raise all of the dead, which is what the Dead Sword and the Dead Game will do. It will give you an instant army across the world of all the dead.
Rob, we're about out of time. Comics fans, check out Snake Eyes Dead Game. It is out in stores now.
And listen to my podcast. I have a podcast, Robservations with Rob Liefeld.
Later this year, the long-running Yakuza series gets another massive installment with Yakuza Like a Dragon, and for the first time since the very first Yakuza game on PlayStation 2, this one is getting a full English language track with a star-studded cast led by none other than the legendary George Takei, who is joining me right now. George, thank you for coming by.
Good to see you. Well, live long and prosper.
The Yakuza games are, this is a long-running series, has been going on for ages. It's got to be something of a daunting task to jump into this series. Can you tell me a little bit about sort of how you were approached for the part and what was most appealing about it, and really just what drew you to the character?
Well, my agent called and said, I've got an exciting project for you. It's about the Yakuza. And I said, oh, that sounds fascinating. What's it all about? And he said, well, it's a game, and he knows that I'm not a gamer. And so I said, oh, that means I can't do it, because I don't know how to game. But he said, no, they want you for your voice and your dubbing background. Just think of it as another piece of drama. And so I said, okay, if that's it, if I don't have to memorize a new, different world of gaming, then fine, I can do that. And that's how I wound up with this fascinating and really impressive project that goes in depth into the very tightly closed world of the Yakuza.
Now, you play a character who's Masumi Arakawa, who's sort of a mentor figure to the main protagonist of the game. Can you tell us a little bit about the character and sort of how you really sort of embrace that role?
Arakawa was born into poverty. Usually those that get involved in the Yakuza world are people that come from a background of poverty. And he rises, and he's a mature man now. He's lived through a lot of Yakuza experience. He's a composed man. He is completely a member of the Yakuza family community, and he recruits a young man that he thinks will be a good member of a useful member of the Yakuza family. He encounters him at a point of great distress for him, and he himself makes a great physical sacrifice. My very first gig when I was a young teenager, I got hired to dub in English dialogue onto a Japanese science fiction film called Rodan. And so I began my career doing that. And here I am still doing the same thing. But this one, because it's animated, it's not as demanding as my very first dubbing gig was, where I had to lip sync on close-ups. With the animated nature of this film, it's you don't have that lip syncing challenge. Just getting the dialogue in while the lips are moving, and it doesn't have to sync with the lip. So it was a much easier work than the very first challenging gig that I had more than 6 decades ago. I've been in this game.
I was gonna ask about this. That was pre Star Trek. This was one of your very earliest gigs, and I feel like both sort of the technology behind dubbing, but also the popularity and reception of Japanese media in the West has changed. I wanted to kind of hear your perspective on sort of what it's like seeing how localization has evolved over the years.
Well, what really impressed me is the depth that they go into in telling a Yakuza story in this gaming form. It's a very esoteric, very closed off, very demanding society, Yakuza is. Think of the mafia with all its codes of honor and loyalty and fealty to the upper members of that society, and that in Japanese. Sort of like if you also know something about the samurai culture, it's the extension of the samurai culture in contemporary times, but it is severely demanding. And once you commit to it, it's a total life commitment. And yet, within all the rigid requirements and commitment that you make to that society, that humanity, that compassion in that core being is what comes out in the story of Arakawa's relationship with Ichiban.
Now, for a lot of people, I think especially right now that no one can really travel anywhere, the Yakuza games are a phenomenal way of sort of getting to immerse oneself in Japanese culture and sort of, virtually visit Japan. As a Japanese American who's very familiar with Japanese culture, is there anything aside from the sort of complexities of the, samurai Yakuza code that really sort of jumped out at you in how the story is told or sort of how the characters interact with each other?
It's the human relationships. Despite these codes, there is a unique and singular relationship between Arakawa and Ichiban, and how they face some of the challenges where the human compassion comes into conflict and how they overcome that or don't overcome that is the great drama in this, I think. Think
Wonderful.
of the Godfathers, the family relationship, the literal blood family relationship. In this case, Arakawa's relationship with Ichiban is not blood, but in many ways, it's stronger than a father and son, a blood relationship. And it's the Godfather and the kind of sacrifices of the family, literal blood family that one has to make. It's that kind of almost inhuman human relationship that contributes to the drama and the poignance of this story.
Well, George, I am dying to see your performance firsthand later this year when Yakuza comes out on Xbox One, PS4, Xbox Series X, and PlayStation 5. And George, it's a pleasure chatting with you. Love your work, and I'm still happy to see you out there doing wonderful new roles like this. Thank you so much for your time.
Live long and prosper.
Later this year, Yakuza fans and newcomers to the Yakuza series are in for a treat with Yakuza Like a Dragon. Joining me now to discuss it are Yakuza series executive director Nagoshi-san and Yakuza series chief producer Yokoyama-san and Amelia, who will be translating. Gentlemen, madam, thank you for joining me. Now, on the subject of translation and localization, this is the first Yakuza game since the original Yakuza on PlayStation 1 to get a full English dub. And on top of that, it's also getting a multi-platform launch. So it seems like it's in a really good position to attract a lot of newcomers to the series and get a lot of new fans on board. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what the game itself is doing to kind of onboard new players to the world of Yakuza.
プレイステーションというハードを中心に、展開してきたシリーズだったんですけれど、今回大きく、Xbox シリーズであるとか、ハードが広がっているので、特に新しい人たちにこのタイトルを広くプレイしてほしいと思っています。で、 シリーズファンの方だったら、ご存知かもしれませんが、今回、主人公が実は変更されていまして、春日一番という新しい、シリーズの顔が登場させていますので、新たな気持ちで、これまでの予備知識なく、好きなだけ遊んでいただくことができる、ちょうどいいタイトルに仕上がっていると思いますので、そこら辺はすごく作り手としても期待しているところです。
Wonderful. Now, I wanted to talk about Ichiban Kasuga because he's an exciting new character. I'm dying to get to know him. I feel like I know Kiryu very well at this point. Pretty close with Majima, but this is a brand new character to me. And I was curious, as creators, where did the character come from, and sort of how do you feel he differs from previous Yakuza protagonists? And sort of how has his character evolved over the course of the development of Like a Dragon?
いや、別にいや、こういう感じでやるんですよ。まあ、大丈夫。いや、これは答えようか。まずですね、旧作ファンの方は昔出てたキャラクターがすごく気になるとは思うんですけど、まあ、そのキャラクターたちも要所要所では登場してきますし、そういう意味では旧作のファンの方も安心して遊んでいただける部分もあると思いますけど、まあ、何より今回は新しい主人公になって、その新しい主人公の新しい魅力に触れてもらうことが我々は一番の願いですし、ただまあ、桐生とある意味で正反対の性格というか、キャラクターを作ったことによって全く違う龍が如くになるんじゃないかっていう心配もしているプレイヤーも多いと思うんですけど、龍が如くチームが作っている以上はですね、まあ、その龍が如くという作品にふさわしい中身には必ずなってますから、どちらにしても、まあ、安心して、十分楽しんでもらえる作品になっているとは思います。ついでに言うと、龍が如くのシリーズが、桐生のシリーズが長かったので、そこでもっとこう違う主人公の話が作れたらいいなっていう願いも僕自身もチームの方もあったりしたので、逆に今まで桐生ではできなかったドラマとか、桐生では作れなかったテイストっていうのを今回思い切ってぶつけることができた分、そういう15年間分のこうストレスを発散できたというか、そういう部分も含めて魅力的な作品になったと思います。
Beautiful. The Yakuza series has had a huge surge of popularity in the West over the last few years. Aside from it just being a really good series of video games, did you have any ideas of sort of what led to this, or what allowed this to happen? Because there was, the first game came out with an English dub, and then it sort of seemed like it kind of went away for a little bit, and then it came back with Zero, and just everyone got really excited about it. And I was interested if you had any thoughts on what led to that.
正直言うと、まあ僕らも海外で、のユーザーに理解して売れてほしいなっていう願いはあったんですけど、やっぱり僕らが作ってるものって欧米のスタジオのそのいわゆるメガトレンドなゲームとはちょっとやっぱりテイストは違うと思うんですね。やっぱグローバルに通用するとはいえグローバルニッチなものを作ってる部分もあるので、やはり癖も強いと思うんですよ。ただまあそれはそれとして、やはり、王道なものを楽しむユーザーも多い中で、先日、そのアカデミー賞もとうとう韓国の作品がグランプリを取ったような時代にもなった中で、いろんな今、オンラインの時代が始まったわけじゃないです。もうだいぶ時間が経ってますけど、いろんな国のいろんなテイストの作品を楽しむということに、世界中の人がもうだいぶ慣れてきたというか、そういうものを求める声が日増しに強くなってきた結果が、こういうゲームの世界にも反映してきたんじゃないかなっていう気はします。龍が如くという作品がこうね、映画界のパラサイトのような存在にゲームとしてなれれば一番嬉しいなと思います。
I love it. Well, was there anything else you wanted to add about Yakuza Like a Dragon?
日本のゲームクリエイターと欧米のゲームクリエイターと、ゲームを愛して作っているっていうことは同じなんですけど、やはりドラマを作ったりする中で、特に人間ドラマを作る中では、やはりこう フォーカスしてるポイントがちょっと違うと思うんですよね。で、その違いがやはり僕はむしろ面白くて、そこに多分人種を超えた気づきみたいなものが多分僕はあると思ってるんですよ。で、それが、単にユニークだなっていうことで終わるんではなくて、今まで気づかなかった他の、コミックや映画では気づかなかった気づきみたいなものが新しい感動を呼んでくれるきっかけになってくれることも僕は十分あり得ると思うので、龍が如くという作品を通じてですね、またこの新シリーズを通じて、そういう体験をしていただけたら、いっぱい幸せかなと思います。
Wonderful. Well, Nagoshi-san, Yokoyama-san, thank you so much for your time. Amelia, thank you for translating. I am dying to get my hands on Yakuza Like a Dragon later this year. And you watching at home, you have no excuse not to play it. It's coming to everything. It's PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, PC. It's on everything. It's got an English sub, it's got Japanese audio, it's got subtitles. Figure it out. Play Yakuza. Please, I beg of you. Thank you so much.